کنفرانس بین المللی در پاریس با حضور رئیس جمهور برگزیده مقاومت 7 دسامبر 2013 16 آذر 92.
I do want to start by acknowledging the extraordinary life of Nelson Mandela. We don't see many statesmen like Nelson Mandela, one of the great statesmen of the last century, not simply for what he did in South Africa, but for what he did for every nation that struggles. And he has given a great gift to all of us. We need some of that statesmanship. The reason I keep coming back, and the reason I'm involved in this and have been for 3 or 4 years now, is simple. There are 3,100 approximately Iranians in Iraq that the United States of America disarmed and gave each one a promise in writing that we would protect them. When the 52 people in Ashraf were murdered in cold blood in September, each one of them had one of those cards in their possession. So I seek to save 3,100 lives, or do the best we can to do that. And I also seek to redeem the honor of my own country, which has failed to stand up for its promises and has repeatedly lied to our Congress about what's happened, lied to the Iranian dissidents, and lied to the American public. Now, the blame, of course, starts with the mullahs. We understand, we know what the mullahs are about. I think the first responsibility that the United States have is not to fix the mullahs. That is not our responsibility. What is our responsibility is the behavior of Prime Minister Maliki. Because without the United States of America, Prime Minister Maliki would be sitting in Tehran in exile. I prefer him to be in North Korea, perhaps in exile, but he would not be in Iraq. We created Prime Minister Maliki. Prime Minister Maliki, as I predicted 11 years ago when I opposed the intervention in Iraq, is a puppet of the mullahs in Tehran. Prime Minister Maliki takes his orders from the mullahs in Iran. The first recommendation that I have is that the United States Congress cut all military and civilian aid off to Prime Minister Maliki. Because it was no different than us making all the blunders that we made in our foreign policy in the last century. When the American people are forced by their Congress and by their president to support murderous despots, and that's what Prime Minister Maliki is, we always fail in our foreign policy. When will the United States learn that it is not okay to ally yourselves with the Pinochets and the Contras of the world, that we have to ally ourselves with the people who keep their word, who are nonviolent, and who seek democracy? That does not include Prime Minister Maliki. Prime Minister Maliki murdered those 52 people, and he did it with our weapons. We have, in the United States, some complicity in the murders at Ashraf. Our State Department testified before the Congress of the United States that the people at Camp Huria had a significant number of T-walls and other defensive administration. That was a lie. They did not have that equipment. So the people that said that to the State Department, said that to the Congress, either didn't know, in which case they're incompetent, or they were not telling the truth, in which case they're now in contempt of Congress. We have to do better than this. We are supposed to be the leading democracy in the world. We are supposed to be the leading advocate for human rights in the world. We have completely and utterly failed. Now, not only have the American people and the American Congress been lied to, by the State Department. But those of us up here, and a whole lot of people that aren't here, have been lied to. When the State Department wanted to move the MEK out of Ashraf, they came to us for help. We helped convince Madame Rajavi and others that they needed to move out of Ashraf for their own safety. Can you imagine how we feel, we Americans that helped the State Department convince the Iranian dissidents to move out of Ashraf, to go to their present habitat? Can you imagine how we feel when the government of the United States and the United Nations told us that they had an agreement with Maliki that would guarantee their safety? The State Department didn't just lie to the United States Congress and to the American people. They lied to those of us who are Americans who convinced them to help them in their policy to remove people from Ashraf. There needs to be a change. The State Department needs to redeem itself, and it can only do that by telling the truth. Now, the fact of the matter is we're running out of time. When Bill Clinton left office, he was asked what his greatest regret was. And what he said was that his greatest regret was not intervening in Rwanda, where 800,000 innocent men and women and children perished in a genocide. The United States cannot say they were not aware of what is happening in Iraq. What I don't like is the notion in this quote-unquote realpolitik, the notion that we're really willing to sacrifice 3,000 people's lives so that we can get along with a group of people in Tehran that have repeatedly lied to us and boasted about fooling us. Part of the negotiation cannot be the entrapment of 3,100 people who we promised in writing that we would protect. You can't do that, and if you do that, you are no better than the other people practicing realpolitik. Realpolitik is an excuse for telling lies, doing what you want. It's short-term thinking. Short-term sacrifice of human rights never leads to freedom, and if Nelson Mandela didn't teach us that, we need somebody else to teach us, because we have not yet learned his lesson. I would say the State Department is not beyond helping, saving. They have done some things right. But the scale of what they have done right is heavily outweighed on the side of what they have done wrong. So I call on the United States government. I call on the administration. Because, after all, the State Department is in the service of the President. I call on the administration to get serious. And we should exercise the tremendous financial pressure that we can exercise on Nouria al-Maliki. And we should, in fact, be part of a war crimes tribunal to put before the International Criminal Court all those people, including Nouria al-Maliki, who have committed genocide in Liberty and Ashraf with our weapons. So I want to close the way I started. This is not just a matter of saving innocent lives. Innocent lives are taken every day. This is a matter of saving innocent lives, which the United States is aware of, which the United States has a special burden for, since we promised each one of them in writing, personally, in writing, that we would protect them. This is a moral test for the United States of America, and despite gestures, there's been lots of talk from the White House and the State Department. Despite gestures, we are failing that moral test. And 2 days after the death of one of the truly great statesmen of the last century, I call on my country to be great again, to stand for the democracy in deed and not just in word, and to keep its promises to these 3,100 unarmed Iranian exiles who we promised to protect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Tutu. Thank you, of course, Mrs. Rajavi, for calling us all together here. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. I think today, more than at any time in the years that I've been involved in the cause of the MEK, we all know what fate the mullahs wish to impose on the MEK members remaining in Iraq. The only way that their situation can be improved is to make it clear to the State Department, to the P5+1, to the United States government as a whole, that whatever happens with respect to Iran's nuclear activities, we will not permit the residents of Camp Liberty to be forgotten or regarded as an insignificant detail. In particular, we will not allow the United States government to forget the solemn promise that was made in 2003 by a United States general in writing when the residents of Ashraf were disarmed, that they would have protected person status under the Fourth Geneva Convention and would be protected. Now, Mayor Giuliani told some of the history of MEK's own contribution to detecting Iran's nuclear program. And so I hope and believe that MEK will continue to be of assistance in that respect as well, because it will, in so doing, it will help not only the world, but itself. When Iran cheats, and they will cheat, make no mistake about it, they're probably cheating even as we talk. But when they cheat, and it is detected, and MEK through its sources in Iran learns of it, and makes it known to the United States and the world, then there will be a way out of the delusion that we seem to be living in now. So whatever grand strategy the delusional diplomats think they're carrying out, we are not going to permit the fate of the MEK residents to be treated as a secondary. Nouri al-Maliki has said in recent months that there are arrest warrants against several residents. The United States cannot stand by and permit him to act on that claim and still retain any moral standing in the world. You know, the government of the United States has three branches: judicial, legislative, executive. We've already prevailed in the judicial branch when the MEK was removed from the State Department list of foreign terrorist organizations only after a court, the judicial branch, threatened to act on its own if the State Department did not act. Thus far, the executive branch has declined to act. Our principal hope now appears to rest with the third branch, with Congress, which has the power to act and at least to hold hearings and to cut off funding to the Maliki government. It has the power to do those two things so that it can cut off the means whereby Iran works its will and shine the bright light of publicity on the State Department's duplicitous conduct. Because of the part that we were made to play in what happened to the residents of Camp Ashraf who became residents of Camp Liberty, we are going to do whatever is in our power to make sure that it will not escape responsibility for the people it pledged to protect. Now, we all need sources of inspiration at a time like this. One of them, of course, is Nelson Mandela, a man who, by personal example, acted for himself and for his nation, but also was able to rally through his moral authority thousands and millions of others. We have that example. And we have the example of the history of the United States, if we'll look to it. Today is the 72nd anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. The United States was jarred into consciousness about what it had to do when it underwent that attack. And at that point, it wasn't worried about moral courage. It got up and did what it had to do. Well, it is time for us to get up and do what we have to do again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Tutu, Sister Javi, all of our friends and colleagues, all of you here today, and I know our brothers and sisters in Camp Horia listening to us tonight. And let me start my first message to you. We know how much you are suffering. We know that there are hostages that have been taken from you, which are being kept, and God knows what else, by the Iraqi authorities at the assistance and with the complicity of the Iranian authorities. I want to express it also in the form of our regrets and our personal apologies. As one of my colleagues said, we did not just work with our Department of State to persuade you and your leadership here in Paris to move from Ashraf to liberty. We came to Paris. 4 of us who are here today, we came to Paris on our own time, at our own expense, and at the request of our United States Department of State. And we sat down with Madame Rajavi, with Ambassador Kobler, and we made the case. We persuaded you that it was in your interest, and indeed critical to your safety, to move from Ashraf to liberty. You know, I spent most of my years as a FBI agent, a police officer, and later as a prosecutor. I have never seen a crime scene, a massacre scene, as the ones that we saw today. I have never seen scenes like this, where innocent men and women were tied and tethered and shot and executed at point-blank range. This is outrageous murder and genocide of the highest degree. You saw those guys marching in. They weren't just casually approaching. They were marching in uniformed, disciplined, tactical maneuvers. We also know that Camp Ashraf was surrounded by Iraqi brigades and all types of electronic and physical surveillance. There is no way that strangers could get into that camp, massacre 52 people over the many hours that it took to accomplish those crimes, and leave undetected. And contrary, not just to common sense and the forensics that you can see, but all you have to do is go on the internet. The mullahs and the regime bragged about these murders, welcomed these murders. It is absolutely impossible that those could have occurred without the direct command, influence, and complicity of the Iraqi leadership, supported by the Iranian regime. You know, I have 3 sons who wore the uniform of the United States. I wore the uniform of the United States Army. We know that our military services, our colleagues who are not here with us today, promised in writing that the safety of the residents, not only of Camp Ashraf, but now of Camp Horia, would be guaranteed and protected by the United States. Where is the anger and where is the outrage in our government, and particularly our Department of State, about the non-fulfillment of that promise, the violation of that promise, which has resulted in mass genocide and could easily result in additional mass genocide? It is unbelievable to us that we have not heard the outrage from our current Secretary of State, our prior Secretary of State, who takes credit for delisting this organization, whose listing was an outrageous act of appeasement to the Iranian regime when it happened. Where is the anger and where is the outrage from many of these people who were directly involved in making these promises, and particularly persuasive in having the move of these residents to a place where they are now in almost grave danger? In addition to some of the things that my colleagues have asked for, what I ask for tonight is an outrage and a proactive, intensive commitment by our government to rescue these hostages. So in addition to all the other things that have been asked for, the other thing that we should focus on is the bringing to justice, which is something that all of us here, at least the Americans, have been in the business of doing for many years. Bringing to justice the war criminals, and the people who have committed these crimes. Another fact which we should keep in mind in terms of any negotiations is a formal report and charge in October of 2006 by a prosecutor named Nisman, who was an Argentine ambassador and investigator. In an indictment, in a criminal instrument, he stated that the decision to approve the bombing, this is the EMEA bombing, was ultimately made by the supreme leader, Khomeini. But other senior members of the government were part of the decision, including then-President Rafsanjani, Foreign Minister Velayati, Intelligence Minister Falahi, and, very interestingly, the National Security Council Secretary Hassan Rouhani. We should not forget, as we do negotiations, that many, many matters are open and many matters of war crimes and genocide have to be addressed. The only reason they ever showed up for a negotiation was not because they wanted to solve strategic problems, but because they were on the brink of disaster. They were on the ropes as they had never been on the ropes before in 34 years. The most important thing is what, Madam Rajavi, you have done as the leadership of the one player, the one entity in this whole process, including the United States government, that has kept your promises, that has enunciated a charter of freedom, which has effectively fought and countered the terrorist regime in Tehran, and has set forth a roadmap for liberty for the future of this great nation and its imprisoned people. The United States needs to follow that lead. The organization here is a freedom organization. Its 10-point charter of freedom, particularly for women and equality and nonviolence, is a model charter of liberty and freedom for any organization or any great leader in the world. What has to be done is the United States has to fulfill its promises. You can't make a promise and break it and keep your honor. You can't make a promise and ignore it. You can't draw red lines in the sand and walk away from them. We can't become a country that's running out of red paint, so we can't draw any more red lines. We have no credibility when we try to talk tough because our record betrays that. We go back just a very short period of time. Forget about Chamberlain in 1938. And you know, Pearl Harbor, the day before, we were negotiating with the Japanese ambassador, and the people in the State Department thought they had a promise by the Empire of Japan not to increase its expansion and aggressiveness in the Pacific. So we have many, many things to look at, but we have not done well, speaking as a law enforcement officer and speaking as someone who ran a counterterrorism agency for many years. We have not done a good job with our credibility because we have backed away from trouble and we have broken our promises. And in this particular matter, we have broken our promises and we have backed away from terror. So when they blew up Khobar Towers in 1996, killing 19 Americans, we did nothing. When they blew up our embassies in 1998 in East Africa, we indicted some people, we did not much more. When they blew up the USS Cole in 2000, we did nothing. We have a history of backing away from what Rudy Giuliani so effectively said was our American character and our American credibility for doing the right thing and for facing up to bullies and for facing up to terrorists. Something that we learned as kindergartners and as children, and which children learn every day. With terrorists, there is no negotiating unless you have a firm hand and you're willing to use that firm hand effectively and credibly. We have undermined substantially our credibility, and we undermine it every day that our promises fail to protect the 3,100 hostages who are at huge risk and daily risk. So what the United States has to do simply is keep its promise. We should have planes landing at Baghdad Airport. We should bring every one of those individuals back to the United States and protect them as we promised to protect them. We should scream for an international commission to investigate the war crimes being committed by the president of Iraq, aided and abetted by many other people in different countries. We should ensure that all these past cases that I talk about don't fall off the table, don't fall off the agenda as we try to negotiate some grandiose deal which will win the peace. Because you can't win the peace with terrorists, and you can't legitimize a regime that has killed not just hundreds of Americans, but hundreds of thousands of Iranians and other people all over the world. And if we don't get that right, there will be as many disastrous consequences as there were in 1938 and after Pearl Harbor. Thank you very much.
Depuis des années, car l'affaire est loin d'être nouvelle, Ashraf et bien sûr Liberty font l'objet d'attaques incessantes et meurtrières. Pourtant, tout de même, la communauté des Ashrafiens n'a cessé de donner des gages quant à sa volonté de coopération vis-à-vis de la communauté internationale. Mais rien n'y fait. Rien n'y fait et la vie des Ashrafiens, qu'ils soient dans le camp d'Ashraf ou de Liberty, leur vie, leur dignité continue d'être menacée, d'être détruite. La dernière attaque a relevé du massacre et 7 otages ont littéralement disparu sous les yeux de cette communauté internationale, abasourdie, paralysée et au final complice de l'exaction. Depuis l'élection du président Hassan Rouhani, un voile de Maya s'est de nouveau posé sur les relations entre l'Iran et la communauté internationale. Les déclarations d'amour sont multiples, la signature d'un accord intérimaire sur le nucléaire, le ministre iranien du pétrole déclarant encore tout récemment que son pays ne fixait aucune restriction à l'encontre des groupes pétroliers américains, mais nous invitons chacun à ne pas se laisser illusionner par les signes d'ouverture de la nouvelle politique internationale de l'Iran. Ces tests de crédibilité de la réelle ouverture de la politique iranienne, c'est la préservation des hommes et des femmes d'Ashraf et de Liberty. Alors nous devons plus que jamais être exigeants dans nos relations avec l'Iran. Ne fermons pas les yeux sur les crimes contre l'humanité à Ashraf, à Liberty. Ne fermons pas les yeux sur les exécutions massives en Iran sous prétexte de fausses négociations avec les mollahs sur le nucléaire et le pétrole. À l'Iran des mollahs, nous disons ce que déclarait Nelson Mandela. Tout homme ou toute institution qui essayeront de me voler ma dignité perdront. Vous perdrez effectivement. Voilà, nous sommes là aussi pour rappeler que le plus sûr chemin vers la démocratie en Iran reste celui de la résistance aux mollahs. Grâce à la présence à notre table également de Nutombi Naomi Tutu, nous sentons aussi le parrainage de Desmond Tutu sur notre Assemblée. Et Desmond Tutu déclarait « Rester neutre face à l'injustice, c'est avoir choisi son camp ». Alors effectivement, choisissons notre camp, celui de Liberty et d'Ashraf, et ne nous laissons pas hypnotiser par l'illusion réformiste de la nouvelle République islamique d'Iran. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Ms. Tutu. Madam Rajavi, dear friends, when we were gathered here in Paris at the big annual meeting in June, most of us were optimistic and happy because of two important events that had taken place recently at that time. Most important, of course, was the delisting of the MEK in the United States. And we were also very pleased that the UN person, Mr. Martin Kobler, had been reassigned to some other post and had left as the UNAMI negotiator and chief in dealing with the issues that we are concerned with. So that was good. But since our meeting in June, there have been some significant negative developments. And of course, the most important is the horrific massacre that we witnessed here on TV on September 1st. And it's a shame that the United States has not kept this promise with respect to protecting each and every individual, like so many speakers here have mentioned today. And I remember at a conference in this very room last year, in January last year, when General Phillips, I think, said he was ashamed of his government. He was one of the generals who was personally involved in making that deal. The situation in Camp Liberty is also horrible, and it's shameful, and it's a contradiction that it should be given the name liberty. And the civilized people of the world have to do something about this. Not soon, but immediately. And something also needs to be done very urgently with respect to the 7 hostages. The government of Iraq cannot be allowed to get away with the kind of behavior that is now going on, keeping these people concealed within their own prison somewhere, apparently in central Baghdad. It is not the kind of action and behavior that should be condoned. And therefore, the United Nations particularly, but also the United States government, have a great responsibility in freeing those people. A lot of people have spoken today about the Geneva Agreement between the 5 Security Council members plus Germany and the Islamic Republic of Iran. Well, in itself, it's a beneficial thing to reduce the level of nuclear development in the world. That, as such, should be welcomed, but one should not lose sight of the ultimate objectives of the regime in Tehran. The ultimate objective to develop nuclear weapons and potentially use them on their enemies who are our friends. And we must not also allow the regime in Tehran to use this kind of agreement to think that they can get away with the killings that are going on every day. We should not condone that, and such activity is not condoned and should not be condoned by any agreement that is reached at the level of these 6 states with the regime in Tehran. But more importantly, it should not be an excuse. Such an agreement that has been reached, and maybe a further agreement after 6 months, who knows, we'll see. If, like Secretary Kerry said, if we are not naive and not stupid, maybe such an agreement can be reached by negotiating from strength. But it should not be allowed to legitimize the current mullah's regime in Iran. Why? Because we are aware, and we know, and we have discussed it so many times, there needs to be a regime change. And we know who needs to take over in accordance with the 10-point plan. That is our dear Madam Rajavi. And then ultimately, after the transition, there needs to be a free and fair election in Iran. So, I will conclude on the note that if, despite everything that's happened, despite all the negative elements that we have witnessed, if such a regime change ultimately can be brought about, I know that will be in the spirit of Nelson Mandela and all the other great peacemakers that have been with us in this world during the 20th century. Thank you.
I would first of all like to thank all of our wonderful speakers for your words of courage and encouragement. And I would like to thank you who are here in this gathering for your lives of courage, for your dedication to a free and democratic Iran, and therefore to your dedication to a true human rights community. Again, I quote President Nelson Mandela, who said, "To deny people their human rights is to challenge their very humanity. There is no such thing as a part freedom. Either we are fully free or we are not free at all." The US, the UN, and the EU have said that they are dedicated to a system of human rights, to democratic governance. If that is the case, why are those countries and all institutions silent in the face of Prime Minister Maliki's double dealings? How can it be that they continue to support him economically and politically when they see his actions of running to Tehran over and over? How can they trust him when he has said over and over that he is in agreement with Iran that the MEK must be done away with? Most recently, just a couple of days ago, the Iranian official news agency reported that Prime Minister Maliki was in Iran, was in Tehran, met with the mullahs, and was given instructions. He was first given praise for what he has already done. What has he already done that the mullahs would be giving him praise? Murder unarmed people, execute fathers, mothers, carry away hostages. That he accepts that praise for those actions should be enough for the world to say, we no longer trust you. It should be enough for the US and the UN and the European Union to say, we know that the refugees are not safe with you, but we also know that democracy is not safe with you. The silence must end. The complicity must end. And we gathered here today have to be the voices to bring an end to that silence, to pressure those governments. And I as a South African, know what a determined world community can do. Because it was the people of the world who applied pressure on the apartheid government that forced that government into negotiations so that we could today be honoring the first president of a democratic South Africa. And as we say farewell to him, say that the words he spoke at his inauguration in South Africa about our country are the words that will be spoken in Iran not too long from now. Never, never, and never again will people be oppressed in this beautiful land. Thank you.